Hello BookTube. Today for Tag Tuesday, I will be doing the 5 Terrible Books tag. This tag was created by Daniel of Guilty Feet, and I will leave a link to his channel in the show notes down below. The idea of this tag is to talk and rant about 5 terrible books while trying to avoid mentioning books that other booktubers who have done this tag mention as being terrible. I had originally planned on doing this tag last week, but I had some difficulty assembling the 5 books I wanted to talk about. 3 of the books I knew right off the bat I wanted to talk about, rant about. But the other 2 were harder to settle on. And I also wasn't entirely sure what proportion should be books that I still have in my possession versus books that either never had or have long since gotten rid of. What the proportion should be between nonfiction and fiction. And I finally settled on the 5 today. 4 of the books I still have. One of them I got rid of last year. And it's 2 fiction to 3 nonfiction. So, let's get started with the book that I no longer have in my possession. That is Dryland's End by Felice Picano. It is a space opera set X number of centuries or millennia in the future, in which humanity is one of the 3 key species in a multi-species, multi-planetary space polity called the Matriarchy. The Matriarchy is at war with rebel robots and androids and artificial intelligence, and these robots have developed a genetically engineered virus that renders women sterile. Their reproductive organs are atrophied and destroyed. To stave off extinction and political upheaval, the matriarch sends the main character, who is a roguish playboy secret agent, and his partner, alongside one of her aides, to a backwater lost colony planet where the main character's father may have disappeared to, and said father might have a way to solve the problem. So when the main characters and his companions get to this planet, they discover that this planet, the Dryland's End of the title, is itself in some crisis. There is ecological devastation, seawater, ocean levels are rising, threatening the survivability or the habitability of the planet. Also, mysterious invaders are kidnapping the young men of who are the inhabitants of this planet. The young men are being kidnapped by mysterious invaders. So joining the main character and his initial companions are 2 natives, a father and son, whose older brother, or elder son, older brother, has been kidnapped. Eventually, they find out that the kidnappers are tied to the main character's father. What's happening is that the man's solution to the problem is to transform these young men that he's had kidnapped into hermaphrodites. They can both sire children as well as conceive children. And these young men are then married off to various invaders. And the main character was the first such young man born from this procedure. And eventually things sort of work out. The androids, I think, are defeated, or at least their agent is defeated. There's a revolution, so on and so forth. If I remember correctly, I don't know if there actually is. There's a conclusion. I don't quite remember how it ends. It's been almost 20 years since I read it. And I never wanted to reread it. I despised the book quite a lot. I think a lot of my problem is the sense I got that while Felice Picano might have been a science fiction fan, his work is mostly literary fiction. And there's definitely the sense that he's slumming. He's not doing as good of a job as he could have. The science is fairly bad, and the world building is fairly bad. The matriarchy is basically a patriarchy in drag. A lot of the science fiction elements just don't work. And I think while he might have wanted some kind of... I'm not entirely sure if the story quite reads or interpreted, like the themes quite work out how he would want it to, if I'm making any sense. It might be a situation where the interpretations drawn from the book might not necessarily have been what he wanted, but I don't know for sure. I just know that I very deeply hated Dryland's End to such an extent that I have claimed it as the worst science fiction novel I have ever read. And that the only reason why I kept it was because I did not want to run the risk that somebody else would be inflicted with that book either. But I did eventually get rid of it last year when I moved. So, and I think maybe part of the reason why I found the book so terrible, besides the fact that it is terrible, was the fact that it wasn't quite what I wanted. When I was in my early and mid-20s, I hungered for gay stories. And when it comes to science fiction and fantasy, I've always been a bit disappointed with gay stories. Like, they've never quite worked for me. And I think there's a bit of that disappointment as well. In addition to the fact that Dryland's End is just crap. Moving on to the second work of fiction, Brickmakers by Selva Almada, translated by Andy McDermott. This is about two young men, Marciano and Pajaro. It's Pajaro Tamay and Marciano Miranda. They are in the process of dying throughout the course of this story. The story begins with them lying in a field, bleeding out after they killed each other in a knife fight. And so the story goes back into why these two young men hated each other, the history of their fathers, who also hated each other, and what ultimately brought about the confrontation between the two that resulted in both their deaths. And where I find the novel to be terrible or disappointing is that Almada tries to incorporate too much in too little space. If the novel were significantly longer, more of a family drama, the time she spends with the fathers, Oscar Tamay and Elvio Miranda, would make more sense. And if their conflict was the reason why their sons had their conflict. Would also make sense. But that's not quite what happens. The father's conflict is not the root cause of their son's conflict. And in fact, by the time that Pajaro and Marciano die, both fathers have long since departed the scene. Elvio was murdered 10 years before the story begins, and Oscar abandoned his family the following year. So, and that's really not explored. Also, the exact reasons why this current fight takes place. Marciano finds out that Pajaro is having a relationship with Marciano's younger brother, Angel. Isn't really explored either. In fact, many of the characters are ciphers. There are two younger Tamai kids who really might as well not exist. Marciano and Angel have two younger sisters who are twins. They really don't matter a huge amount. Pajaro's older sister, again, doesn't really have much of an impact in the story. So it's too crowded for the space it has. And I don't think it works. And that's largely true of the other book of Almada's I read. It's like it's too packed for the space. And anyway, so I think this is fairly terrible. Now, let's move on to the nonfiction. And I'm pretty sure if you followed along with my channel for any length of time, you will probably be able to guess this next book. Spider by Katarzyna and Sergiusz Michalski. Apologies if I butchered those pronunciations. Spider is part of the Animal series from Reaction Books. The Animal series looks at specific ant species of animal or groups of animals and looks at the biology, evolutionary history, natural history, social history, or the relationship with humans history, cultural criticism, economic exploitability or impact, and other aspects of the animal. The best of the Animal series, I think, are usually balanced. Sometimes, particularly in my experience, the older entries in the series are more focused on one aspect of that grouping I listed. In Spider's case, it's cultural criticism. The Michalskis take a psychoanalytic approach to criticize the role of the spider in human history, in human culture, in the arts, literature. And it is absolutely terrible. It is just atrocious. Now, that might be because I do not like psychoanalytic literary or cultural theory. It's my least favorite of them all. I was at one time an English lit major with aspirations for an academic career. And my response to so one example of how terrible this book is their explanation for why people are arachnophobic. That there's some kind of, the appearance of the spider is vaguely reminiscent of a part of the female anatomy. And there's some Freudio mumbo jumbo to explain it. When in actual fact, the reason why people might be arachnophobic is because they're jerk of a father threw a spider into your hair when you were a little girl, thus resulting in arachnophobia, as my grandfather did to my mother. And she is quite arachnophobic. So, I really need to get rid of this book and probably the rest of the Reaction Animal series, but once again, I have difficulty in getting somebody to take me to the library so I can donate them to the Friends of the Library book sale. Even though I don't know whether or not I would want to inflict spider on anybody else. Next up is The Queen by Matthew Dennison. This is a biography of Queen Elizabeth II that came out a year or two before her death. The first part of the book is pretty good, up until King Charles, the Princess Royal, Andrew, and Edward are children. But once they get to be adults and, well, things start to take a gossipy, tabloidy turn. And the book just descends into just a steaming pile of poo. And finally, Egypt's Golden Couple by John Darnell and Colleen Darnell. This is a joint biography of Akhenaten and his chief queen, Nefertiti. The problem with this book is that it is 3 books in one, and none of them quite work out together. So there is, of course, the biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and then the opening of each chapter has a fictionalized scene that adds absolutely nothing to the book. Also, there are occasional scenes of the Darnells on excavation or doing something in Egypt or maybe back in the United States. And while I fully recognize that ancient Egypt is not a popular subject anymore, it is very rare to see new works on ancient Egypt coming out. The sole exception was a few years ago when the centennial of the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun came about. There was a small uptick in the number of books on ancient Egypt, but that has since died down. So I can understand trying to get in while the getting was good, but really this book should have been 3. The biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, which could have led into a historical fiction novel about them, and then maybe a excavation memoir or something, because, I mean, for good or ill, the Darnells are a rather colorful couple. So that could have been interesting. But as it is, Egypt's Golden Couple is a fairly terrible book. And the only reason why I'm probably going to keep it is because ancient Egypt is sort of my jam and I don't have anything else to replace it with. Unless, of course, somebody else comes up with a much better biography of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Even though Akhenaten is not my favorite Egyptian pharaoh by a long shot. I would much rather have biographies of Ramesses or Hatshepsut. I mean, I do have a biography of both of them, although I would prefer a better biography of Hatshepsut if I could have my way. But anyway, so those were the 5 terrible books I wanted to talk about. If you would like to do this tag, please do so. It was a lot of fun to do, and it did actually improve my mood. Last week was not great, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this tag last week. And today has been borderline. So this tag definitely helped me with that, I'm in a much better frame of mind right now. So thank you, Daniel, for creating this tag. Anyway, BookTube, I will see you tomorrow with hopefully a new video. So until then, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.